Welcome back to the Win More, Live Better podcast. And today's guest is not only a very highly respected coach, but also he has become a tremendously well regarded thought leader, not just on leadership, but on culture development, well beyond just the sporting world, and somebody who is now providing value and sharing lessons across different spaces through speaking and sharing on his platform. And so, Coach Mark Godfrey is joining us today as my latest guest on the Win More Live Better podcast. So, Coach, just more than anything, I'm super appreciative of you taking some time and being willing to do this.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I've been looking forward to this, so thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I've followed, your work from afar, and I think we've got some mutual friends and connections, and every time I see a post, like I feel like it's like weekly, I find something that I save or that I highlight because it certainly aligns really well with some of the work that I'm doing now, but also really what the core of this show is about is exploring the human side of coaching and leadership and where I thought could be an interesting starting point is, I think any of us can look at your resume and quickly see how accomplished you've been. Over 400 plus wins as a head coach, conference championships, NCAA tournament runs, a national championship as an assistant. But I'm also mindful that like a box score, the resume doesn't always tell the full story about the person or the story itself. So I would love to maybe just start, beyond accomplishments and places you've been. What should we know and understand about you to just kind of understand like what's important to you or what matters to you within your life and your coaching and your career?
Well, I'm so blessed for the run that I had as a basketball coach. I started off as an assistant coach at UCLA for 7 years, and we had a great experience winning a national championship. And then I was a head coach for so many years. And I tell people when you've been a head coach in the SEC and the ACC for 17 total years, you've been through some wars at that level, at the highest level, and you've competed against some of the best coaches and players that the game has. But for me, what's important to me is, it's not how many wins you had or trophies you had, and it's nice you got stuff behind you, and they remind me of some of the things that I was able to experience. But at the end of the day, it's to me, it's really I'm at a stage in life where I just want to hopefully impact people in a positive way. I do have the opportunity to speak a lot, and I get in front of corporate crowds, and that's great and it's wonderful. I get involved with some young kids around the game of basketball and still trying to help them so that there's an impact and they can become better. And so that's really where the things that fills my cup today. Again, I'm blessed. I've had a great run. I'm thankful, but hopefully now I'm at a stage where I can really make an impact on other people more than I did as a coach.
Love you listen to that and the values certainly start to come out, the leadership, the service, the gratitude, all those and I'd imagine those have been things that have certainly been cultivated over time, but they were also instilled probably in many ways, or seeds were planted at a young age. I know in doing some homework, I know your dad was a coach, and I'm curious, like, what, who were the people that maybe shaped kind of your upbringing the most, and like kind of your perspective on leadership that really maybe were catalysts for why you pursued coaching?
I was very lucky in that the fact I had a dad who was started off as a high school basketball coach, then he was a small college Division III basketball coach, and later became a Division I athletic director. And then his brother, my dad's name is Joe Gottfried, and his brother Mike Gottfried was the head football coach at Pitt and Kansas and Cincinnati. So I was very lucky to be around the game, go in the locker rooms and listen to how they communicated to their players and just kind of see it from a up close perspective. And then I had this wonderful opportunity to go to UCLA, and Jim Herrick hired me and then promoted me 3 times within 7 years. And we just developed a great friendship. And then on top of that one, you talk about being lucky as a young person. I was 20, I think 3 or 4 years old, and I met John Wooden for the first time. And, over probably the next decade, I was so lucky to develop a relationship with him. Here's a guy that won 10 national championships in 12 years. When you put the Mount Rushmore of coaches anywhere. I don't care who you put on there, and obviously the Nick Sabans and the Pat Rileys or the Phil Jacksons or some of the greatest Bear Bryants. John Wooden is up on that Mount Rushmore. So for me, I had this amazing experience to kind of go to his house and sit there, just he and I, and talk. And we talked basketball, but more than that, he talked about life and leadership and integrity and all the things that really resonated to me. So I've had some wonderful guys that I have kind of been fortunate enough where they've poured into me, and then hopefully I can pour into some other people as well.
Yeah, you're certainly talking about somebody who's on the Mount Rushmore again, not just in basketball, but really across the entire coaching landscape. And I can imagine we could easily spend probably the rest of the show just diving into those lessons and things that you instilled from him or watched him do and so forth. But where I kind of want to go, and maybe this is just me, but I and my own self, but I think early on for many is you come into a sport or a craft and you feel like you kind of have a lot of answers. You feel like you kind of know what's needed to do and whatnot, and then you get in it and you get around others who've been in it for a while, and you quickly discover that maybe that level of competence isn't quite as robust as you thought. Were there things that you felt like you quickly discovered early on from Jim, from John Wooden, that, maybe you thought you knew about coaching and leadership that through those conversations and observations actually became more apparent to you?
I think here's an important thing. That's a great question. I played at University of Alabama for a very good coach named Wimp Sanderson, and he had a way of going about things, and that was kind of how I knew it should be. And we practiced a lot. We practiced hard. Coach Sanderson was excellent. He was very successful. Then I got to UCLA, and I then began to work under Jim Herrick. And I think a lot of us at times, I hope that we all realize that when we're in different situations or different systems, and Wimp Sanderson's system and the way he approached it was very different than the way Jim Herrick did, and they both were good. They both had great success. But when I was very young, I had the opportunity then to start comparing. And I said, okay, here's how this one did it. Here's how this guy did it. And what works for me, what fits into my personality, what's important. And you're also learning the good and the bad. Like, hey, I may not want to do those things that way if I become a head coach, and you're learning all the time. And then on top of that, kind of the umbrella was Coach Wooden. And, now all of a sudden I've got, I'm sitting at the feet of this guy, and I think he's probably not only one of the greatest coaches ever, but probably one of the wisest people I've ever been around. And I can remember, I tell this story, often. It was early in the morning one morning. I'd gone to his house. I think it was about 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. And he lived in a very small kind of apartment there in a suburb of Los Angeles out in Encino. And anyway, that particular morning, I can remember it like it was yesterday. The light was kind of shining through in between he and I. He was sitting at his desk. I was sitting on the couch, and it was very quiet that morning. And I could hear the grandfather clock. It's just kind of ticking away over there, and it's quiet. And for whatever reason, that particular morning, uh, he looked right at me and said, Mark, I want you to always remember this. And he said, the softest pillow in the world is a clear conscience. And I can remember there were so many times when I was with Coach Wood, and I would walk out to my car, and I'd actually take a pen and start writing these things down. I was like, okay, there's a golden nugget. I got to keep writing them down. But that one really kind of resonated with me. And I tell people this too, that throughout my adult life, and I was able to coach at some great places, and sometimes that I held true to that, and then there were other times where I think I stepped away from that. And there were nights where all of a sudden my pillow wasn't as soft as it should be. And I made mistakes, or I made sacrifices to my integrity. Or I made a bad decision, or those type things start to creep in, and the competitive nature of the game sometimes puts us quickly in those situations. Like, okay, I want to win, and I'm competing against guys, and they're good, and I want to be good. And so sometimes I think we all can fall into that at times. And so, but that was a lesson that Coach Wooden taught me. It's something when I speak to crowds, I definitely, that's a point of emphasis. I talk a lot about integrity, and hopefully, we all can learn from one another as well. Sometimes the mistakes we've made, we can share those with people, and and maybe that helps them to avoid that, in their own lives as well.
I love that story. What comes up for me is with athletes, and I don't know if this was exactly the words that you would use with your players that you had over time, but I think in most instances, the players that produce the most consistent high performance, like they play with almost a freedom. Like there's a freedom in how they play. They allow their bodies to do, use their God-given talents, but also what they've trained, and their mind is able to, for the most part, get out of the way at times, but that freedom is also very relevant for coaches. And there are a lot of circumstances, to your point, and conditions where it makes it difficult to sometimes coach with that kind of freedom. So for you, there's a lot, and I'm trying to figure out where exactly I want to kind of go with this because I could probably spend the rest of it just in that camp. But I'm curious for you over time, what were things that kind of helped you go to bed at night with more of a clear conscience? Like, were there things that over the course of time that you did learn or that did help?
Well, I think here's the it's a great question again. Here's the point to that. I think we're all still learning, all of us. I'm a little bit older now, but I feel like I still have so much to learn. And but then I also have a lot of life experiences where I feel like I can share some of those with people, and maybe it ends up being motivating for them, or it's inspiring in a way to where they say, okay, I want to make sure that I make good decisions, make right decisions. I think for all of us, one of the most important things, and for me, this has always been important, and there have been times I've drifted away from this, is to develop a couple people in our lives, two or three people. Doesn't need to be 10 or 20, it's just two or three that we can have in our corner, that we all understand. If I pick the phone up and I call you, and I'm explaining something to you, and maybe it's a difficult situation, I want two or three people that I know for sure have my back, that care about me, that have no agenda, that want nothing from it. And all I want is their true, real, sincere advice, or their thoughts, or their perspective on whatever it is that we're going through. And so I think for all of us to kind of build that circle around us, it's just a couple people that we have in our lives that are there for us for no other reason than because they care. That's all. They don't want anything, there's no agenda. And I think for me, that's one of the most important lessons when I even talk to young coaches all the time. And what's interesting about coaching is when you become a head coach, and I was a head coach for 24 years, and like we talked about, I coached at a pretty high level. A lot of times you begin to feel like you're just sitting on an island by yourself. When you're an assistant coach, there's three or four other assistant coaches, and sometimes we can go, get a sandwich somewhere, and we can kind of vent a little bit, like, I can't believe we're doing this. And, you're doing it privately. It's not like you're being disloyal, but you've got a group that you can kind of share with on an equal basis. Well, when you become the head coach, you're kind of sitting there by yourself. You look around and it's like, okay, who do I get to vent to? Who do I get to share with? I need people too that'll be real with me and honest and authentic. So that's one of the things for me that I hope you know, to share with other people. And it's powerful when you have a group of people that's in your corner that you can call, that you can sit down with, and that can help you make good decisions.
I'm a big proponent that success is not a solo journey. And I think we all inherently recognize that when it comes to athletes, and that no athlete is generally going to reach their full potential without a coach or guidance, a mentor, whatever term you want to use. But sometimes I think we assume coaches will, that they'll reach their peak or their full potential, maybe solo, or that's how it often feels. I interviewed Coach Mike D'Antoni, a month ago, and he said the same thing of just like that, the weight of the isolation that can come when you're in a very prominent role and you don't maybe always have you have your sometimes you have your counterparts in other clubs, but you're also trying to win, and there's only so much you really are comfortable sharing. This ties in well because recently one of the things I saw you share that resonated was you talked a little bit about withholding things and like hiding. Like when you make mistakes, potentially, sometimes the thing that we do is we default to silence and we don't have a vehicle or an open space to share it. Whether this is through your own experience or the coaches that you now mentor and help, what have you found to be what makes it difficult for leaders, do you think, to kind of to share when they are struggling, to open up or to seek out that support when they've maybe lost their way?
I think that comes down to, there's it's part of human nature. Sometimes people are, you know, and I hate using the word, but it's, insecure at times. Like, they're afraid. I'm afraid to tell you, man, I'm struggling with this. Well, I made a mistake. I, I, or whatever the situation may be. And so I think for those of us that can gain confidence in the fact that I can share with somebody else my struggles. When I was 20, I want to say 23 or 24 years old, I was a graduate assistant at UCLA. My first year, I got hired by Jim Herrick, and here I am. I just quit playing, and man, I'm excited, and I want to be a head coach one day. It's all that. All of us have been in that situation. We were at Cal, I can remember like yesterday, and we had a shoot around that day at 11 o'clock. It was an evening game. And so we were going over to the gym at 11 o'clock to do a little walkthrough, do a little shoot around. And I jumped up in the front seat of the bus, and Jim was sitting there by himself. And he was to my right. And I said, Coach, tell me the biggest difference in being an assistant coach and a head coach. And honestly, I was hunting for this big, long, great answer. I was waiting for, he's going to give me this magnificent, stories or whatever, and I'm going to get this great answer. And he looked back to me and he just looked right at me and said, it's lonely. And I can remember like yesterday just sitting there thinking, wow. But my question, what's the difference in being an assistant and a head coach? And his answer was, it's lonely. And I think so many times people get into the leadership positions. Might be a head coach, could be a general manager, could be the president, could be a CEO of a company. It doesn't really matter. When you kind of get in those positions, you can end up in a little bit of a silo by yourself. And it does become lonely. And you feel the weight of it. And I can promise you that every coach that you've talked to and that uh, when you lose a game, the head coach goes home and I would stare at the ceiling. I'd lay in bed and stare at the ceiling till 4 o'clock in the morning and trying to figure out, okay, what didn't I do? What could I have done better? How could I have helped my team better? Did we not cover that well enough in practice? All the things, they're going through your mind. So again, I think it comes down to even when you reach those positions where you've climbed the ladder and you're up there by yourself and you're in that leadership position, I think you have to surround yourself with people that you can call, people that you get on the phone with that can, have your back a little bit. I think that's really important.
Along those lines, again, another thing that I've heard you express that I think has showed up in many conversations that I've had with coaches and leaders is this like you were Coach Gottfried for so much of your professional career, and that then becomes your identity becomes very tied to the role, whether it's at a certain position or just that of being a coach. And again, to your point, when you're balancing that with like in many instances for some, it's like this is what I spent my whole life preparing myself toward pursuing. But we also know that there can be costs to that. Could you talk a little bit about how you experienced that as a coach, but then now maybe how your perspective on it has it, if at all, expanded, changed as you've gotten more and more removed from it in its traditional sense?
It's a wonderful question. I think all of us in coaching and probably in all walks of life, but because I'm a coach, I can relate to coaches. Uh, when that run ends, and for a lot of coaches, a small percentage get to end their career, standing on the top box, riding out of town with a parade, and everybody loves you, and you're the greatest of all time. That's rare. It's really rare. And for a lot of us, it's kind of a marathon to the to the end. Man, you got to make it, and to whenever that time comes. And then I think it's such a great point you made in that for a lot of us, our identity was tied into me being the coach. And, everybody wants a piece of my time. I've got a lot on my plate. I've got a ton of responsibility. The trajectory of the program is going to go because of me as the head coach. And a lot of that's true, but I think the mistake that we all make, and what I've tried to do, is also realize that was just what I did, and I did it for a long time. I was involved for 33 straight years in basketball in that regard. And sometimes what happens too is when guys step out of that, they've been a head coach, they've climbed the ladder, they've stood on the top box, they've had levels of success. And I've got friends right now that I talk to regularly on the phone, coaches that aren't coaching right now. And it's a struggle. It is a struggle. You wake up every day, the phone's not ringing, nobody needs you, nobody's calling you. Uh, there's not a call you have to make. There's no recruit you have to call, or no one's, you don't have to be in the gym. And for a lot of guys, it becomes a real struggle because all of a sudden their world is turned upside down. And mine has been turned upside down. It's been turned upside down to where, who I kind of thought I was. And then I look back and say, but that's just what I did. I did that. And, um, and you have to be content with yourself. I've had times for me to say, you know, I had a great run and I was blessed. How many people get to do what I did my whole life? I mean, it's unbelievable. And so there's a lot of lessons that I learned along the way. There's a lot of coaches I talk to right now who aren't coaching, that are struggling a bit. And I can empathize with them. I've been in your shoes. I understand what you're feeling right now. And but that doesn't take away the fact that you were a wonderful coach. You were very successful. You did a great job. But sometimes it doesn't last for 40 years, and that's okay. And then you got coaches and a lot of guys you've had, I'm sure, on your show, and we've got friends, mutual friends, and some of the people that we look at and say, man, that guy was so good, but he got fired. And when you get fired, it's no fun. It hurts. It hurts bad. It's a tough one. And I think sometimes the general fan who watches the games on TV and he's watching a team and the coach gets fired and they bring in a new coach and the fans kind of just automatically shift their gear to their minds to the next guy, and all of a sudden that coach that was there is just kind of pushed to the side. And so sometimes I don't know if they understand the depths of actually how much that hurts. And I don't care if you're in the NBA, if you're in college or high school, it doesn't matter to me. When that happens, and it's happened to me, it's no fun. And so what I'm trying to do now at times is, I'll pick the phone and call up guys. And, because a lot of times the phone's not ringing. No one's calling anymore. Nobody. And so I try to reach out to a lot of coaches that I know and guys I competed against and guys that were really, really good. They were really good. But for whatever reason, the school or whatever made a decision and, life moves on. So that's a little bit too kind of what fills my cup at this point in my life.
You raise like such a great point in that, there's already the built-in, again, challenges that can come when our identity is tied to a role, but especially when that identity ends before you're ready for it to, when it's not on your own terms. And to your point, not everybody's going to end on the stage with the victory parade, and there are some where it ends and it wasn't your choice for it to. And I think something that's come up a lot that I've used with players, I've used with coaches, it's like the distinction that when your identity is tied to something that can be won or lost, we oftentimes set ourselves up for crisis later on, because then when it's stripped away, it's that's we're the thing that will be constant and outlast our roles and titles. But it's hard. It really is hard to have that perspective in the moment. One thing that you hinted at earlier that I thought was really good, is this idea of like drift, and this idea that, like, I say all the time, like, coaches are, if you've ever been driving, and you got those little grooves on the side of the road, they're rumble strips, right? Like you run up against the grooves and they kind of like jolt your attention and get you back on track. Like, coaches are professional rumble strips trying to help you avoid drift and not veer off course. For you, though, I'm curious. Did you have a particular moment where not just that you had drifted, but like it was when you discover you're like, oh, I'm actually way off course from a path that is going to be sustainable or a path that I actually really want to be on?
Oh, I think there have been a number of those, if I'm being very honest. And, whether it's in my personal life, I went through a divorce that was very difficult, been fired from my alma mater, very difficult, when you're coaching at the school you played at. And even though I coached there for 11 years as the head coach, that was still a tough day for me. And so I've had those in my life. I've had a lot of them. And, I think there's an analogy that I use a lot. It's like, if you get in an airplane and you put that autopilot on and that's going to take you straight to your destination, and you just get one click off on that compass, just one click, and now your plane is starting to veer off, and over time it begins to veer just one click. It's now it's taking you somewhere that's where you didn't think you were heading to. And I think some of that's human nature, some of that's just part of being who we are as people, because none of us are perfect. But I think it's important to try to always keep your compass, on true north, just true north, and stay true to those things that the values that are in your soul and who we're part of. But sometimes that's hard. It's really hard. And I think people, also underestimate how difficult the jobs are as coaches. And I'm not saying that if you're the CEO of a major company, those are difficult. They're in the same breath. We're all in the same boat. And I look at a guy like Mike Brown right now. He wins a championship with the Knicks, and he's been fired, a few times, and those hurt bad. And but boy, you talk about a guy that bounces back and finds a way, and one day he does stand on that top box, and he gets to hold the trophy up. But again, I think that the thing you're talking about is just keeping our compass and trying to keep that compass the best we can on true north and not allowing ourselves to take those steps. I had a post on my LinkedIn, I think it was the other day, and we talked about, the three lies that kind of always creep in to our mind. And all of us are in those situations, whether it's professionally or privately. And we start to kind of convince ourselves, either, it's just a small thing. And that's kind of that one click off the compass. It's just a small thing. Okay, it's okay if I do this right now. Or, everybody else is doing it. Therefore, hey, what's the big deal? Man, everybody else is doing it. And again, that one click off a compass on your compass, now you're off the path. But the biggest one for me, I think, always has been, nobody else will know. And we find ourselves in these situations in life, and usually one of those three lies are the lies that are going to creep into our minds somewhere, somehow. And I have a good friend that was a longtime Navy submarine officer, and they go down 500 feet below the ocean, and unbelievable person I've met. His name is Mark Kohler, and I remember him saying, when your values are clear, your decisions are easy. But what happens to us is sometimes our values we get in a gray area on our values, and then at that point our decisions are very hard because we've put ourselves in the muck of that decision. So values staying clear, decisions become easier. Try not to let those one clicks get us off our compass. Let's stay on the path, and let's be the best that we can be. And that's really what I try to say a lot to people when I do speeches or however.
Really beautifully described and articulated, and certainly it resonates and aligns a lot with my experiences. And one thing that I'll share this quick analogy of I've framed this before, and others have adapted this in a sense, but there's kind of these two scoreboards, right, in life. You have society's scoreboard that values wins, championships, titles, fame, fortune, you name it, all that, achievements. And then you have your personal scoreboard. And Mark has his own personal scoreboard comprised of your values, your purpose. I have my own, and every other coach listening has theirs. And what happens sometimes is we get in these roles and we've spent all of our time chasing success on society's scoreboard. But if it's never been aligned with our personal scoreboard, you had a really great post the other day about that sense of feeling empty following achievement. And for me, that's really what happens, and that is when there is a disconnect between I'm putting all my time and energy into success on this scoreboard, but if it doesn't align with your personal one, and I'm not here to say you can't, I want to win just as much as anybody, right? Like it's not one or the other, it's both. But if you haven't clearly defined your values and your purpose, you end up winning at the wrong game or a game that's not fulfilling. Could you talk a little bit about, because I thought you had a really beautiful sentiment the other day of just that idea of achieving a lot, but winning itself can sometimes just feel empty.
It can, and so many times that's what drives us. That's the competitive nature that we have. Like, we're just driven. Like, oh, I've got to win, and no matter what, and I want to stand on the top box. I want to be the champ. I want to be this and that. But I think you've said it so well that for all of us, what you hope is those that do have success, that it doesn't end up feeling empty for them because there hasn't been alignment into their personal life and the decisions they made, and to feel good about how they got there. When you stand on the top box and deep in your gut, like deep, deep in there, nobody else knows, but sometimes but I compromised a little bit to get there. I compromised on this, I compromised on that. It's still fun, but like deep in your soul, somewhere in your core, it's not as fulfilling. It doesn't fulfill you as much. And then I think, for me too, what's been important is over time, if I look back and, again, I was very lucky and fortunate to be a part of a lot of winning. But the thing that really, I'm a little bit older now. I'm kind of in that last third. I've had 2/3 of my life, hopefully, and hopefully it's a long time I keep living. But I look back, and what means the most to me was not winning an SEC championship or, you know, being a national champion assistant coach at UCLA. It's the relationships that I was able to develop with all of the people that were around us at that time, and all those players and coaches, assistant coaches, administrators, everybody around. To me, when I look back, that's the joy for me. I actually think about those things more than I ever think about, beating Duke at Duke, which is an amazing accomplishment to go into Cameron, and it was phenomenal. It was unbelievable. Um, but really, I look back at the guys on that team, the players. They'll reach out, they'll call me. I just had a kid this morning get a nice contract in Italy. He sends me a text, and he's a player that I coached, and I'm seeing this guy do well. That actually kind of, you know, it's more rewarding for me. And I think most coaches, if they're honest, they'll say that. Winning is intoxicating. I mean, winning is, it's amazing. But the relationships that are established for me, and I think for a lot of coaches, that supersedes anything, any kind of trophy, any of all that stuff. Matter of fact, I tell people this all the time. You know, I got a few things here behind me. I coached for 33 straight years, but I got a lot of stuff in my garage. It's just in boxes. It's got dust all. I don't have any place to put it. And man, you know what? I really don't want to put them up. I really don't want them. I don't need a shrine to myself and all this stuff. And so we get caught up though, and sometimes we miss the boat. We think sometimes it's all about that. And like you said, there's a personal part about it that hopefully we're having success in both at the same time.
This timing of this conversation is coincidentally like perfect. I was having a conversation with he's a professional athlete last night, and he was asking me, "Hey, have you seen the new season of Quarterback, the documentary series on Netflix, and chronicling all these guys?" And he was telling me about Joe Flacco, goes and wins a Super Bowl at early on in his career. He's Super Bowl MVP, and I guess he's gifted this sports car for it. And during the documentary, they're showing him, and it's like it's in his garage, just kind of collecting dust. And then they, asking him like, "How much have you driven?" He's like, "Oh, a couple times." Like my kids like it, but it just sits here, And I think it's in its own way, we had this great conversation about, he was fortunate enough to win or get a ring a few years ago, and he's like, I almost didn't like we came out here and I almost didn't even bring it with me. Like I almost just left it at our other home, So to that point, not to say that experience doesn't have value and meaning. It
Yes.
does certainly, but
Oh,
to
yeah.
your point, you're highlighting, I think, some things that are that don't always get talked about, but they are certainly felt. That the most meaningful parts are the who you did it with, and a lot of those shared experiences and shared adversity along the way.
When I coached at UCLA, I was young. I started, I was 23, and I left there when I was 30. So I was there for 7 years. And then, my last year there, 1995, we won the national championship. And I thought at 30 years old, oh, there's going to be a number of these in my career. I'm coming, this is happening, all the time. And then you realize how hard it is. And you got to have some luck along the way. Everybody does. Every championship team has had some luck. I don't care who it is and when it is, the ball bounced their way, somehow, some way. And, I think back, I was in the arena in Miami, and Miami is playing the Spurs, and they miss a shot, and the ball comes off the rim, and it comes to Chris Bosh, and he turns and he throws it to Ray Allen in the corner. And a lot of people remember that play, and boom, he hits the shot right there. And San Antonio was in a position to win. They were going to win the championship, and Miami came back and won it. But if the ball bounces another direction on a missed shot, if it doesn't come right to Chris Bosh, right above his head, and if in fact Ray Allen is behind him instead of right there in the corner where he can see him, he throws it to him. They probably don't win that game, and San Antonio wins it. So all of us, the bounce of the ball, it's just part of the game. And so sometimes we end up on the winning side, sometimes you end up but that's part of life. But I can remember, going back to that UCLA team, and we won it in 95, and it was an unbelievable experience. It's something I still cherish, to be part of that. But, I look back now and I see a guy like Toby Bailey, who was a freshman then in 95, and he's in his 40s now. And he's very successful, and he's got a family and children. And I look at Ed O'Bannon, and I look at Tyus Edney, and I look at all these guys now and the relationships that we were able to build. Not just that team. There are other teams too at UCLA, and then at Alabama and Murray State. And uh, the relationships they're just so much more meaningful to me. I was so lucky this year, this past basketball season. I was the head coach at Murray State from 95 to 98 in a little bitty town in the western part of Kentucky. And we had some really good teams for 3 years there. My last team, I think we were 29-4, and we were really good. But they retired one of my former players' jersey, and so I flew in. I went back to Murray, and I'm sitting there, and his jersey goes up into the rafters. And this guy named Isaac Spencer, he's not a household name, great player for Murray State level, but he came over to me and he said, "Coach, I wouldn't be the person I am without you." And my response back to him was, "Well, I wouldn't be the person I am without you." And that right there is the joy that we all should have in what we do, whether it's coaching or in business or whatever it may be. Winning is spectacularly fun. It's amazing. But boy, that relationship, when I've got a guy that looks me in the eye and says, "Coach, I wouldn't be where I am today without you," and I can respond the exact same thing back to him, that to me, I'm good. Like, I'm good. That's what it's all about.
It's beautiful. No, it's a great story. It's a great example of it. And, I think one thing that came up for me as I was thinking about, what you were just describing, I think it's very easy, when somebody wins, we all immediately want to study them, right? We all immediately want to like, okay, well, what are they doing? And it's most industries very copycat, like, and what I appreciated in my interview recently with Coach Mike D'Antoni is he's like some of the best coaching performances that I've ever seen, or like he's like we're on the team that maybe they won 20% of their games and they should have only won 10%. Like it was when it maybe always wasn't great, and so what I'd almost be interested is like, was there a particular, and I'm sure there's more than one for different reasons, but like, was there a particular season that you found most challenging in your coaching career that maybe shaped ultimately how you ended up leading or how you really grew over time?
I don't know if there was one season or one team, but I do say this a lot to people. And, when I was a head coach, I think I lost 200 and I think the number's 287 games. 287 times. I went home and I laid in my bed, stared at the ceiling, and I thought the world was going to end because we lost the game. It was over. The world's coming to an end tonight at some point. I can't, you know, and I don't really talk about the number of wins, but in those losses, boy, you learn a lot. You learn a lot. And it's really embracing sometimes the mistakes we made. It's taking a hard look at yourself and reevaluating everything. Uh, I can remember when I got fired at Alabama, and I say this sometimes when I speak to people and to groups. I went home and I crawled in bed and I got in a fetal position for about 2 days. I did not want to. I did not want to come outside. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I was hurt. It's my alma mater. It's where I coached. It's where I played. Um, but then you realize the is coming up tomorrow. It's coming up. Life will move on. They will move on, and your ability to pick yourself back up off the deck is, to me, the resilience that we all have to have in life. Because what you learn as we get older, and what I've learned, and I'm sure you have, and a lot of people that you've had on your show throughout the time you've done this, is adversity is coming. Guaranteed. That is guaranteed, period. And it's how you handle that and how you respond to that is what really makes us or breaks us. And it's a perspective, it's a mindset. I talk a lot about this whole GID mindset, with grit and integrity and desire. But part of that is the resilience to be able to pick ourselves back up off the deck. And, you look at different coaches, you look at leadership and guys in leadership position, and most of us, most everybody, they've had some blows now that have been hard, tough. And they've been punched in the gut to where, it's like, man, I don't want to get out of bed, period. And, but it's our ability to bounce back and find our way again, put our 2 feet, both on the ground, get my back straight and get my head up. Real simple. 2 feet on the ground, back straight, head up, and let's go. And I think through those losses, and I've had a bunch of them, probably learned a whole lot more in those than I ever did through all of the wins I had.
I appreciate you certainly. It's again, it's so easy to default to the successes and the wins, and obviously those are obviously very meaningful. But to your point, there are certainly wonderful lessons and ways in which the failures, the losses, mistakes, et cetera, and so on shape us. One thing, with my last few questions here, I want to kind of start to shift it maybe more now towards more of the work that you're doing here, and I want to talk a little bit more about that get it done mindset. But what it reminded me of is when you were talking about the number of losses. So very recently, I don't golf per se, but I am quite fascinated with the psyche of golfers. And obviously, they had the big Open Championship this past weekend. And there was a great soundbite in one of the early interviews with McIlroy, where he kind of talks about um, how foolish it can be to just chase winning and to obsess over. And a lot of the things that we've been talking about here, in essence. And he talks a little bit about some of the mistakes that he made, in essence, kind of obsessing over it over his career. But my favorite part is I shared this, and a lot of people seem to like it. But somebody commented underneath it, and the comment was, I did the math. Rory McIlroy has had 284 PGA Tour starts, and he's won 10% of them. And it's like it's such a great illustration to your point. It's like we if winning is the only thing, then we probably set ourselves up for a lot of moments of fetal position, disappointment, loneliness, and so on and everything in between. And so I appreciated your
Yep.
recognition of that. You do have this like kind of signature framework, this idea of like get it done. And I'm curious for you with the work that you're doing now. I mean, certainly I'm sure that showed up in your coaching, but now especially too with the work you're doing, like can you talk a little bit about like why those three qualities have kind of emerged as so essential for you and really how you help different coaches, performers, leaders, and so on cultivate those?
We had a game in 2004. I was coaching at Alabama. We're playing Stanford. Stanford that year was 30-1. They were the number one seed of the number one seeds. So of the four number one seeds, they were the best team, ranked number one in the country. And we're playing in Key West Arena in Seattle. And my team, how about this? We were 16-12. We were the last team when they had the selection show. Uh, CBS, NCAA March Madness selection show. That year there were 64 teams, and they had 63 teams already slotted. And I got my team grouped together, and we're watching the show, and one team left, and the announcer said the Alabama Crimson Tide. So we were so excited. We beat Southern Illinois in the first round game in the 8 seed, 9 seed game, and now we got to play Stanford, who's the number one seed. And halftime, we're down by 3. Going to halftime, a little pep in the step. Guys were feeling pretty good. Guys excited. We're knocking on the door. We got to crack at these guys, and they were good that year. Came out and started the second half. We missed our first 17 shots. We couldn't find a way to get the ball in the basket for nothing. I'm talking about layups, free throws, jump shots. The ball wasn't going to go in. And I remember calling a timeout, and our guys came to the bench, and their heads were a little bit down. First time really all season. They kind of dropped their heads. And I remember telling those guys, we got two choices right now. We can get on the plane and fly home. Hey, we're in the second round of the NCAA tournament. We were 16-12. Nobody even thought we should get in the tournament. And so, hey, there's nothing to hang your head about. Hey, they're good. I mean, they're a legitimately good team. Or at this moment right now, we can find a way to come together. And this is what I'm going to tell you guys. I remember telling them this, you're going to have a lot of these in life. This is a get it done moment right now. This is a GID moment. And you got to find a way to have more enthusiasm than you've ever had. You've got to develop more grit than you've ever had right now. You've got to execute better than you ever have now. You got to play your role as good and as well as you possibly can right now. We're going to cheer for each other harder than we've ever cheered for each other the entire season. And we came out of that timeout, hit a 3-point shot, and all of a sudden, here comes the Crimson Tide. It comes down to the very end of the game. Josh Childers, great player, fouls out of the game. We got a guy that goes to the foul line, makes 2 foul shots. We go up 3. We end up beating them at the buzzer, and we beat the number one team in the country. We went on to go to the Elite Eight, beat Syracuse, and then lost to the eventual national championship at UConn. But when I speak to groups, I break it down into, developing grit and kind of that mental toughness. And we've talked about the adversity. We've talked about those things are coming. You have to pay a price to be good. There's no secret to that. And you have to spend a lot of time, and you have to understand what grit is really all about. That toughness that you're not going to give in to the situation, that I'm going to find a way. And then I talk a lot about integrity, and I'm very vulnerable. And the fact that, integrity kind of drives us. And really, we've already talked about this. Without that level of integrity, no matter how much we win, it just seems empty for us. So that's a big part of it. And then the other part, obviously, is the desire. And, you've had athletes, coaches, and all the coaches can relate to this right here. I used to ask players all the time when I was recruiting them, do you want to become a great player? And obviously the answer was, yeah, I do. I want to, coach. Yes, absolutely. But then always my next question was always, well, how much do you love it? Like, do you really love what you're doing? Like, really, really love it? I mean, do you love going to the gym? Do you love getting in the weight room? Do you love it? Because if you love whatever it is you're doing, all those difficult times that we have and those tough days and the tough losses, the love for what you're doing kind of drives you. It just drives you through it, and it enables you to just continue on. And so, we kind of break it down into grit, integrity, and desire. And if I walk in and I'm speaking to 200 or 300 people at a company or a leadership group, and whether it's a technology company, a hotel business company, it doesn't really matter. all of us in life can find ourselves in these situations where, life kind of settles in. We get a little bit complacent. Uh, we're doing a good job, but we're really not kind of pushing like we should, and we know we should. And so, if I can give a group of people or coaches or a team just some tools that will help you along the way, then that's what's going to do it for me. I got a book coming out in a couple months. It's called the Playbook for Success, based on the GID mindset, and I'm excited about that. But it's just filled with stories and lessons that kind of enable us. Maybe one story resonates with somebody, and they say, "That's me. I was in that situation right there." And if somebody can relate to that and come out of it and be on a better track to have success, then that's kind of wonderful for me. That I'm somebody that might be able to help them along the way.
I love that. Hopefully, again, we'll make sure that we help promote that because I can't wait to read it again. Everything that I see you share and whatnot, and hearing more of those stories kind of firsthand here in this conversation, I very much know there are many coaches and leaders out there where there are different parts of your stories that will resonate and will tug on the emotions in different ways. I want to bring it kind of here to the end. Last couple questions here, like. Maybe a bit of a loaded question, but like I think of you spent, you spent such a large portion of your professional career in coaching, like learning, how to win and how to do that sustainably. But, at this stage, what I hear from you is it's like you're a lot of it is about like learning just how to live. And I think of the show and really what this is about is, winning more and living better and living well in that pursuit. What are some of the things that you're learning at this point in your journey and in your career with the work that you're doing now, and that yes is helping people win in their own form, but it's also about how to do so in a way that they're living well in the process.
For me, and even when I coached, I wanted to pour into our players. Most coaches do. The majority of coaches, they care deeply about these guys. These guys have made a decision to come play for me when I recruited them, and so I was always thankful for that, and I wanted to pour into them. But I think now, as I've gotten older, I even look back and I say, I did that, but man, I could have even poured more into it. Now, I had 5 young children for when I was coaching at Alabama and NC State, and it took a lot of time. And we all have that in life. That's called our personal lives, but just pouring into people for me, and that's what fills my cup right now. And I also say this to people. I say this when I speak to groups. I don't ever want to sound like the authority on any of this because life is difficult. But really, what I try to communicate to people is, I'm just I'm like one beggar trying to show another beggar where to find some bread. That's it. And if I can help you, and if I found some bread, and I can help you find some bread, then we're good. But I don't want to come off ever as the expert on anything because I've had some great successes. I've had some great failures. I've had both. And so again, I think the joy, and I hope for all of us, really, for all of us, is that we realize by pouring into other people, that's so much more rewarding than just standing on a top box and lifting the trophy in the air. Those are great too now. Those are wonderful. But I think the real joy we have as we get older is to be able to look back and see. And it's so fun for me right now. Like I'll get calls or texts from different players. Or I had 3 guys last night in the state of Alabama. One guy coached at Alabama. One guy used to be my manager. Then he was my graduate assistant. And then I had a nephew who was my manager at NC State. Anyway, they were together. They're all 3 coaching. They were together at a coach's clinic. They took a picture, sent it to me, and they said, "Hey, coach, we're all part of your tree. Your coaching tree." And for me, that's as that's as rewarding as you know going in and beating North Carolina at North Carolina. It's just as rewarding for me to do that than it is some of the things we did along the way.
But I would be a little surprised if your answer to this last question here hasn't been touched on in obviously different forms. Maybe it's a nice build off of this, but this is a question that I usually wrap up most guest interviews with. And so, um, Mark, we've covered a lot here, but what is something that you're proud of that maybe you don't always get an excuse to talk about?
Well, I think the most proud, I think a lot of people would say this, again, I was very fortunate, I had 5 children. And, even, the book that I just wrote, uh, it's dedicated to those that they've always been my why, my children have. And, that your children know who you really are. They kind of have a good idea of really who you are at your core, where a lot of times when you're coaching, the guy sitting in row 12, C and D, he really doesn't know. He really doesn't know anything about you. And even players and coaches, they get to know you, but your children, for me, that's been my why. That's been, why I, do what I do. And hopefully even with my children, I have a chance, to impact them continually now, even that they're grown now, they're between 28 and 34 years old. So, uh, that for me does it right there. And that's where the real joy and the real reward is for me.
Well, again, Mark, I'm super grateful. I know you got a busy schedule with not only your own show, all the different things you're doing, the mentorship, the calls that you're making, checking in on coaches, but then also the speaking and the upcoming book. So, again, I'm really grateful for it. I'll make sure that there's some links in the show notes so that way people that can maybe engage or learn more and dive into more of these stories and lessons, they can do so. But again, just want to thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate it. This has been wonderful. Been a great time. Thank you for having me on.